I mean, lots of people who worked for Trump in high-level national security positions have been sounding the alarm for months. We've heard versions of the same warnings over and over and over again. But these latest comments from Kelly do seem to be breaking through in a way that the others have not.
President Trump, though, is being called a fascist, not only by Kamala Harris in her town hall meeting tonight, but by his former chief of staff.
Former President Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, John Kelly.
Former Trump chief of staff, John Kelly issued a warning.
John Kelly said the former president praised Adolf Hitler in private.
The former president praised Adolf Hitler.
Made admiring statements about Hitler.
He would praise Adolf Hitler, the Nazi leader who orchestrated the murder of 6 million Jews.
Also, that he is the definition of a fascist.
John Kelly said the former president fits the definition of a fascist.
The Republican nominee meets the definition of a fascist.
The definition of a fascist.
A fascist.
John Kelly used the words fascist and dictator.
Kelly went on to say Trump didn't understand the Constitution.
Keep in mind, John Kelly was the longest-serving chief of staff for Donald Trump.
And the Trump campaign is not happy.
So that is what millions of Americans heard on their local news stations this week. Still one of the most trusted sources of news out there in the country. So if you think this is all just some sort of cable chattering class Democratic fixation, it isn't. I mean, according to a new poll from ABC News, half of the country sees Trump as a fascist. According to a new New York Times Siena poll, 76% of the country believes American democracy is under threat. And yet, there's no denying that the race is still tied. So, of course you're anxious. I am anxious too. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high. We've been through a lot as a country. We're just 8 years removed from a misogynistic racist defeating the first female nominee, thanks in part to a boost from Vladimir Putin. And we're just 4 years removed from the violent insurrection Trump himself incited. But in 9 days, and in the days leading up to that, to be honest, the American people get to decide what happens next. And I just want to give you just a few quick reasons why you shouldn't be completely freaking out quite yet. I mean, first of all, the race might be tied, but late deciders are breaking for Harris. According to that poll from the New York Times, 15% of voters haven't decided yet, and Harris is leading with that group 42% to 32%. That wasn't the case just a month ago. Second, people are already voting, and in some key states, women are outvoting men. And Democrats are returning ballots in many of these states at a higher rate than Republicans. According to a report in Politico, early voting in Michigan, which just started, is so far exceeding expectations. I mean, across the state, according to this report, women and black voters have cast early ballots at a higher share than at this point in 2020. Even among young men, a group we've been hearing over and over again, Trump has spent a great deal of money and effort courting. Harris still has a huge lead among young men who say they will definitely vote. And last but certainly not least, Kamala Harris has a far better ground operation and turnout operation. She also has Jen O'Malley Dillon, her campaign chair, who was a part of the team that led Obama's re-election in 2012. She was like 8 months pregnant at the time, just so everybody knows. She managed Joe Biden's winning campaign in 2020, and she was selected by Vice President Harris, asked to stay on this summer because she knew there was no one better for the job. She knows more about campaigns than me for sure, and maybe almost anyone else out there right now. She's joining me now. She's the chair of the Harris for President campaign. Jen, it's great to see you. I know your life is insane right now, and I appreciate you taking the time. So let me just start here. I mean, I am getting stopped constantly in coffee shops and train stations with questions about the state of the race. I cannot even imagine what your life is like out there right now. I will preface by saying I think it's good people are a little freaked out right now at this point. But what should people not be freaked out about the race? You are closer to it than probably almost anyone else.
Well, hey, Jen, it's great to be here with you. And you are right to say that it is okay to be nervous and to be anxious, but don't be freaked out because we feel very good about where we are. We are very confident we're going to win this thing. And it's not just because we want to win. It's because what we're seeing in the numbers and the early voting that you were just talking about, what we're seeing with this extraordinary enthusiasm everywhere we go, we are seeing signs where we look to make sure that we are on track to win a very close race. This is going to be a close race. We've known it the entire fall. We're very focused on that. We've built for these moments right now. And what we are seeing from turnout to our volunteer operation to the enthusiasm growing is exactly where we want to be. And we're really confident about that and confident we're going to win this thing.
So I want to dig into those early data in a second, because everybody's an expert on early voting now. I don't know if you've seen that out on social media, but basically we hear different iterations of this every day. It's a dead heat, it's a coin flip, it's tied. Is that pretty much an accurate characterization of where the race sits?
Well, we do really think it is a margin of error race, and we've seen that consistently throughout the fall. So often, as you know, at this point in a campaign, you might say, well, our chances are not as good in one state or another. We have one pathway to 270 electoral votes. Obviously, that's all we care about, is getting to 270. But we see in every one of our true battleground states that all of them are within the margin. And it's not a margin of error of 4 or 5. I mean, we're talking about a point here or there. We see that this campaign and the vice president has multiple pathways to 270 electoral votes, and that's really great for us. It presents a lot of opportunity. It also makes it tough because we have a pretty wide map. We're out there traveling everywhere. We're building a massive organization that is really driving home in each of these states. But we do feel very good about this. We also know, though, it's extremely close. So, you know, I'm sure you'll ask me about polls. You know, my mom asked me about polls. I get it. But there's nothing that we are seeing that's surprising us right now. This is close. We are on track to win this thing, but it's going to take the work of the next 9 days to close this out. And that's the most fundamental thing that we're focused on.
So let me ask you about the early voting, because as people know, most states across the country, especially the early states, or the key battleground states, voting is happening right now. Michigan early voting just started. I gave some of those numbers. As you're looking at that data, what are you seeing that is encouraging to you, that people out there who are trying to reassure their neighbor or their friend or their mom can tell them about the early vote numbers?
Yeah, so we actually feel very, very good about what we're seeing for early vote. But first of all, there is no historical precedent for this race. I guess that's probably an obvious thing to say, but the reality is what we are seeing is pretty unique to 2024. We are seeing high turnout everywhere. We are definitely seeing that our voters are turning out, and we look at two things. We look at how to make sure just the sheer volume of our voters are on track for what we need to win this race in our states to get to 270 electoral votes. But we're also looking at the number of voters who are not traditional voters. They're lower propensity voters. And when we look head to head at our vote versus the Republicans, we're coming out ahead there. More of our people that don't traditionally vote are showing up. Just in the last 2 days in Clark County in Nevada, for instance, where Las Vegas is, we have seen higher youth turnout in the last 2 days than we've seen at any other point this cycle. You mentioned Michigan. We had 145,000 voters vote early just yesterday alone. So we really like what we're seeing. We're seeing strong turnout. Our margins are strong, and the folks that we're focused on, those lower propensity voters that don't always vote, they're tuning in and they're showing up at a higher level in support of the vice president.
And that's just to echo, this is so interesting. It's significant because lower propensity voters means if they're voting now, you don't have to chase them on election day. And that's a very big deal if they're turning out in Nevada that way. Let me ask you about abortion. I mean, one of the things obviously that has changed, it's obviously a huge issue for Kamala Harris, huge issue in a contrast in this campaign. It is a big thing that happened since the last presidential election is, of course, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Do you think women, I hear this sometimes, I mean, do you think women who are turning out, are there women who are turning out that are not being captured in polls? Is there a portion of people who, as pollsters are looking at the 2020 electorate, that they may not be capturing how angry and outraged women are in this moment?
Well, look, I'm glad you brought this up, and hopefully your viewers saw the vice president in Houston. You mentioned that earlier, where, you know, it was an amazing event. And of course, amazing to have people like Beyonce and Willie Nelson there. But truly what was amazing was the real people, the real stories of people that have been harmed by Donald Trump. That, you know, so much of what we talk about and we're focused on is making this case that a second term of Donald Trump will be worse than the first. When you talk about reproductive freedom, you don't have to make that case in the future. It is happening right now. And the bravery and the courage of these women and men sharing their stories about what they have gone through so nobody has to go through that again is so powerful. And it's powerful to mobilize our voters for sure. I'm sure you feel this way too. This isn't just a women's issue. I I, like so many women in the world, have had my own fertility journey, and my husband's been along with me on that. It impacts all of us. But this is also an issue for those undecided voters that are still out there. And we think they're a small number, but 3 to 5% in these battleground states of people that haven't made up their mind yet. Maybe they're not that political. Maybe they don't tune in all the time. But we know that they are more open to hearing from the vice president than they are Donald Trump, and they want to be there with us. And an issue like reproductive freedom, to remember that that is an issue on the ballot and that we can all do something about it, is really powerful. And you're going to continue to see us drive this home in the final stretch.
Let's make a deal. I ask this question, you answer it, you answer the actual question, and we'll move on to another issue. Let's try it this way. Are you personally okay if Donald Trump says that he wants his generals to be like Hitler's generals?
Americans do not want to talk about that. We've heard a lot of extreme things about Donald Trump from Donald Trump. It's kind of par for the course. It's really, unfortunately, with a guy like that, it's kind of baked into the vote at this point.
Republican Congressman Tom Emmer says people don't want to talk about it. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu says it's all baked in. They sure seem to think voters simply don't care. But the Harris campaign is betting they do. Jen O'Malley Dillon is back with me. She's the chair of the Harris for President campaign. I just showed, this is just a few of them, but you hear this from Republicans on TV, Trump supporters all the time, who seem to think fascism and kind words for Hitler is all baked in and that voters don't care. I know you don't agree with that, but what are you seeing? Because you look at this from the strategy of winning over voters. What are you seeing in terms of why reminding people of this is effective, and who is it effective with?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we have seen from the beginning that when people who have worked closest with Donald Trump speak out, it has real impact on voters, and certainly on these voters that we're still trying to reach, this small segment of undecided voters. We know anecdotally, we know from our research, when someone like John Kelly stands up and speaks about what it was like to serve under Donald Trump, speaks about how he clearly wants unchecked power, the American people are not comfortable with that. And that is an important contrast that we have. And I think that it's fundamental to everything that the vice president is talking about, how we turn the page from this, how we have a leadership in this country that's focused on the issues that the American people care about. So we do think it's important. It's really important when people that are closest to Donald Trump speak out about it. And we've seen that across all of our data.
Joining me here on set, Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former confidant and personal attorney, best-selling author and host of The Michael Cohen Show. Here you are, my friend. You know Donald Trump really, really well, and you once said that he talks in code. So when he says this about Jack Smith and half the voters that believe he's a fascist, does it surprise you that he is still this close, neck and neck, with Kamala Harris?
It surprises me. It disturbs me. I'm perturbed over the whole scenario. You know, when I speak to these, for example, folks who I used to call friends, Upper East Siders, and they're like, I just can't vote for Kamala. And I say, why not? Well, I don't like her look. I don't like her mouth formation was one. No, I'm dead serious. I don't like her giggle. I don't like the way she speaks. I turn around and I say to them, let's be honest with one another. That has nothing to do with it. Has nothing to do with her teeth or her mannerisms or the way she speaks or her giggle. It's simply because, and call it for what it is, you're racist and you're sexist. And even the women, I don't understand how women are playing that same game. None of this makes any sense because you only have one of two choices. It's either somebody who wants to unify the country, who wants to do the right thing for America, and then you have on the opposite side someone who's divisive that only wants to do for himself. He knows that the only way that he avoids prison, that he avoids accountability, is by winning this election. He's not running for us. He's running for himself.
Look at the screen there. We were showing the inside of Madison Square Garden. Thousands are already in there, Michael, awaiting his arrival and those who will speak beforehand. What do you make of this event?
You know, a lot of this is bust-in. It's interesting, the Epic Times, I saw that they had something where, you know, come to the rally, they're bussing people in. I heard there was an entire group of Chinese that don't even speak English. And so do they not understand that they are part of the mass deportation now group that he wants to throw out of the country? But yet, I don't know what they're offering, but, it's like when in 2015, 2016, during the rallies, what they would do is they would put things in on like Craigslist. Hey, come to the rally, get $50. I guess people are hungry.
What about the New York Times, which surveyed, let's look, 50 former officials, 42 of them, Michael, say in a second White House, Trump will seek to influence criminal investigations. Do you ever worry that he would try to come after you again?
Well, as you know, he already did. And
yeah.
He was already successful in doing that. And the Supreme Court, through their recent decision on presidential immunity, they just bolstered his ability to effectuate what he did to me, but onto others, like yourself, like the president of NBC or MSNBC, like John Kelly, like Mike Pence. And who knows how far that he will take this revenge tour, because that's all the next 4 years. God forbid a million times that he wins. The entire 4 years will be dedicated to Donald Trump exacting revenge on his political enemies or his critics.
He has been pushing back big time on the Atlantic article that quotes him saying he needs the kind of generals Hitler had. Here's what he said about this on Friday in Texas. Take a listen.
And it was phony stories by a general that got fired, and he's a whack job, total whack job, a general. This was the same magazine that said that I said about dead soldiers that there was something, what was it, suckers and losers. Think of it. I'm supposed to be standing there over the graves of soldiers with people around me, military people or whatever, making a statement like that. Can you imagine? Can you imagine anybody doing it?
Yeah, actually we can, because it's not too dissimilar to some of the other things that he had said. For example, he wanted to have a military parade when he was president in 2017 to rival Kim Jong-un's. He wanted it down Pennsylvania Avenue in D.C., but he had told people he doesn't want soldiers who were injured because they would make him look bad. Can you imagine somebody saying that? When I see, for example, like Veterans for Trump, it really, again, it just increases the anger that I have and my complete just confusion as to what's going on here. Why would anybody go ahead and vote for somebody who completely disparages them and all of their, fellow veterans, alive, dead, and so on? This is a guy who refused to go ahead to lay a wreath simply because he didn't want to get his hair or his suit wet. These are reported facts. What Donald is doing is he realized he made a mistake with the Atlantic, so he's trying to find yet other examples that would dissuade you from believing the truth.
So Tom Nichols writes, here it is, Trump's depravity will not cost him this election, adding, for millions of the GOP faithful, Trump's attempts to breach new frontiers of hideousness are not offensive, but reassuring. They want Trump to be awful because the people they view as political foes will be so appalled if he wins. I mean, is this saying cruelty is the point, Michael?
Well, it appears so. And the worst part are the people that support Trump are trying to and beginning to emulate him. Last night I was at the Rangers game with friends of mine and my wife, and these three young boys, three little tiny pishers, turn around, they started snitch, rat, how was prison, and so yeah. And so I ignored them. They're absolutely, they're meaningless to me in my life. But this is the type of behavior that you will not just expect, but you will live with under a Trump presidency. They think this is funny. They think that this is normal behavior. They're watching their Führer, their monarch, their king, their leader act like a total ass. And so they feel that they have the right to act in the same way.
Yeah, that kind of behavior.
It's all learned behavior and emulated.
We have my colleague, NBC's Hallie Jackson, this week, who asked the VP about her plans if Trump declares victory early, falsely, by the way, on election night. Take a listen.
We will deal with election night and the days after as they come, and we have the resources and the expertise. This is a person, Donald Trump, who tried to undo a free and fair election, who still denies the will of the people.
You said last time we talked that if Trump loses, he's not going to accept the election. What would that even look like?
Well, what he's going to do is he's going to try to claim victory immediately. And that's, of course, before all of the mail-in ballots come through. And then when he loses, and loses by a large number, he's going to go right back to the big lie number 2. They did it again. They did it again. The Democrats, they stole it from us. And he's going to try to create some sort of a frenzy amongst his MAGA base and the supporters. Here's the difference, though, and I don't want the viewers to get nervous here. It's not like it was in 2020. And the reason is because Trump's not in power. Joe Biden's in power. And we're not going to see another 96 minutes of nothing happening within 10 seconds. In fact, it's even before. The military, the National Guard, SEAL Team 6, the local police, they're already on high alert for any nonsense. They're not going to allow what happened on January 6th to ever happen again.
Let me ask you something, because I don't understand this one. He said he's open to potentially pardoning Hunter Biden. What's the angle on that?
Yeah, so what he's trying to do is he's trying to put it out there that if he loses, that Joe Biden should pardon him. I was doing you the favor. I was going to make sure that your son doesn't feel accountability or held accountable for any of the crimes that he committed. Well, you know that I've been falsely charged with crimes, and, you know, I'm being held accountable for things I claim that I didn't do, despite 12 jurors saying otherwise, as well as civilly. You should pardon me because I would pardon your son.
Okay. After the election, come back. We're going to just kind of go through it all. All right?
Yep.
Thank you very much, my friend.
Good to
Michael
see
Cohen.
Oh, we're in single digits now. Did you realize that? Because there are just 9 days left until this election hits us. And more than 40 million Americans have already cast their ballots. There are also two growing storylines that we need to tackle at the top of this hour. According to the Wall Street Journal, Republicans are facing increased concerns that the party's ground game has stalled in critical battleground states. You don't say. I guess if you don't have one, that's what happens. Meanwhile, some Democratic strategists like Simon Rosenberg of the Hopium Chronicles are beginning to make the case that polls from right-leaning organizations are flooding the zone, leading to an inflated sense that Trump and Republicans could dominate on Election Day. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard and CEO of the Tara Group, Tom Bonnier. Welcome, both.
So let's start with this ground game. Vaughn, you covered the Trump campaign. You've covered them extensively. You've traveled with the former president. What is going on with the ground game situation?
Let's just start off, Simone, with the very fact that Donald Trump has publicly said over the course of months that he wanted the RNCs, the share of their money, to go towards fighting what he says is voter fraud and election integrity units, as opposed to get out the vote efforts, which is the ground game. Donald Trump in August at a campaign rally in North Carolina, he literally told the crowd that they already have enough votes. They just need to make sure that there's not cheating so that they don't lose. And we have seen that play out at the ground game level across the country. It's usually the RNC and the campaign that teams up with the state GOP to build those ground game operations. But instead, here in the recent weeks, we have seen them effectively outsource that operation to the Elon Musk PAC, America PAC, which is sort of haphazardly trying last minute to put something together, along with the likes of Turning Point USA, which is that Charlie Kirk organization. But neither of those two organizations, neither of them have any wins to their name on record here. And so that is a lot of pressure to put on these organizations to do Donald Trump's campaign ground game efforts here. And I think that is where I was in the rural Arizona County of Mojave County just last week, kind of like MAGA capital of the West, if you will. And it was grassroots volunteers for Trump that were the real driving forces there. And so come a week from Tuesday, if Donald Trump is in this race or even wins it, a lot of that is going to have to do with grassroots volunteers and enthusiasm enthusiasm among MAGA faithful.
Tom,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa. No, I was just going to say, I can just tell you, as a chairman of a political party, you can't outsource your ground game to folks who don't know jack about the ground or the game. So you are where you are at this point. Alicia, I'll give it back to you. I just wanted to make that.
I look forward to learning what the difference is between the ground and the game, Chairman Steele, but we can save that for later in the show. Tom, tell me, at this point, 9 days out, what can polls tell you? What is it that polls cannot tell you?
Well, what polls can tell us at this moment is that it's a close election, or at least that's the most likely outcome. We do see that they're bouncing around a little bit. Everybody is still riding the polar coaster for some reason. One poll will come out that shows it close. The New York Times poll a few days ago, Democrats are in doom and despair. This morning, there's a +4 survey from ABC for Vice President Harris, and everyone's excited. The reality is the pollsters don't know. They're building these likely voter models where they're guessing who is going to vote. The reality is we have hard data now. You're talking about the early voting data. That's the data that we should really be focusing on, is who's actually voting. That's going to tell us a lot more. So my advice to people is probably pay very little, if any, attention to the polls over the closing days.
Well, I want to stick with that because I think we need to get on the table and put it right there. That there's a lot of crazy BS going on right now with flooding the zone with bad polling. And there are Republican firms, MAGA firms explicitly oriented towards that effort. You have on Pod Save America co-host Dan Pfeiffer noting this: the fundamental danger of all these Republican polls that are flooding the zone that Simon Rosenberg has written about so often is that they create an impression among Republicans and the Republican base that Trump is going to win. That's part of the setup narrative. That's the setup narrative, because they'll put these polls back up in your face on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday morning and go, well, Donald Trump was leading by 6. How did we lose? And so the reality of it is, I agree with you, Tom. You can't really take these polls to heart because the zone has been flooded with a lot of bad information to bring the averages down for Kamala, because we're basically looking at Trump's ceiling. Mm-hmm. And so how then do we process the rest of the campaign setting these polls aside?
And what does the early voter data tell us? Because
exactly.
The chairman is right. This is the same thing that happened in 2022 with the red wave and all the polling. Right. He's exactly right about what's going on.
Well, and we have to remember in 2022, the average poll missed by 5 points. Which is a big miss. It's why the polls told us that there was going to be a red wave, and it didn't happen because of these red wave polls. Right. And the news is, as you said, Simon Rosenberg has shown us that it's actually a bigger op this time around. There are many more of these red wave pollsters out there doing what they do. So what the early vote is actually telling us is that turnout actually looks pretty good for Democrats, which is somewhat surprising. We didn't expect. We knew that in 2020 there was huge early voting turnout. Democrats were more COVID conscious. Republicans were told by Donald Trump that voting early was fraud. So Democrats dominated it. We expected to see that shift. We know Republicans have been pushing the early vote so far. We're seeing a small shift. We're not seeing the sort of shift that Republicans were counting on. In states like Michigan and Wisconsin, Democrats are actually leading in the early vote at this moment. And states like Georgia and North Carolina, where Republicans started off hot, it's actually coming back together, and it looks more like it did in 2020, which is certainly a good sign for Democrats.
I would also say on that point, Alicia, and maybe Vaughn, you can address this part of it as well. The interesting aspect of this turnout modeling is you have to take into account that during the primary, Trump lost about 20 to 22% of his base that went for Nikki Haley. We lovingly call them the Nikki Haley voter. They are still in that camp. Those folks don't fall back in line. What are you seeing and what is your reporting telling you about how within the various cohorts that are coming together, that are going to the polls now, sort of a read on the exit polling, if you will, the early read on the exit polling in terms of how people are actually landing as Republicans, specifically where you're seeing a big bump, as we saw in Georgia, where they were like 49% of the early vote, or 50-some% of the early vote was Republicans, and 30-some% were Democrats. I said, well, let's be careful about that number, because that's not all MAGA in that Republican vote.
That's absolutely accurate. And let's just, if we could, let's take Arizona as an anecdote to this. Arizona has a long history dating back to the early 90s of mail-in voting and early voting. And we saw in 2020 Donald Trump tell Republican voters, don't do that, go in person or drop off your mail ballot on Election Day. And at the close of election night, when most people were going to bed, Joe Biden had an 8 percentage point lead. But as they started to count those late mail ballots that Republicans were turning last minute, that 8-point lead turned into just 11,000 votes. But if you go, and this is where I think potentially the data that we're seeing so far in this 2024 election is actually maybe more reflective of the 2018 election in Arizona, where at that point in time, it was Republicans who historically were the ones that would mail in vote and early vote. And on election night, Martha McSally and Kyrsten Sinema, they were running in the Arizona Senate race. They were effectively tied when everybody went to bed. But it was Democrats who were coming in late to vote and were turning in their mail ballots late and handing them in person at the voting location. And Kyrsten Sinema ended up beating Republican Martha McSally by 2.5 percentage points. And so for Republicans, they want to see these big numbers coming in right now, because that's how it used to be in some places around the country. If they were not getting these numbers, that's what would be so highly concerning for them. But to your other question, I think when we're looking at here that turnout operation here, really my question that is outstanding, which again, when we're talking about turnout models, just how many of those MAGA faithful are going to actually become MAGA voters? Because Donald Trump turned out a record number in 2020 around the country. But are there even more of those people that he's able to turn out here over the course of the next week?
Yeah.
Tom Bonnier, I am curious. When Vaughn came on, I said, what do you want to talk about 9 days out? And he wants to talk about Tuesday night, sort of, we get to election night, what it tells us about where we are as an electorate, where we are as a country. When we sort of zoom out beyond this, who's going to win, what will it tell us next Tuesday?
Yeah, well, if I can just put in one plug here, because you mentioned election night, I just want to take a slight digression to a reminder. We talked about 4 years ago the Red Mirage, and where what we said is, look, the vote's going to look Republican at first, and then it's going to come in more Democratic. And the reality is, even though more Republicans are voting early, especially in states like Pennsylvania, where the mail balloting is still overwhelmingly, it's still 2-to-1 Democratic, those early votes we see on election night are going to look much more Republican. Donald Trump will say, again, stop the count. And so when you ask, what will it tell us on election night? We have to be very careful in those first few hours, because in a lot of these states, it will look like Donald Trump is winning. Then those mail ballots in states where, look, they asked for the right to be able to count those ballots before Election Day and just have them ready to go. They weren't given the right to do that in many of these states. It could take days to be able to answer your question. But in the end, look, if the polling data is correct,
weeks. Let's manage expectations here.
Right, it could be. Well, California, we know California can take a few weeks to get these votes. So it'll be a while before we can answer that question. But we do still appear to be closely divided. But let's remember, since the Dobbs decision, one party has outperformed the polls consistently, and that's the Democratic Party.
Vaughn, I just, I'm clicking this pen like,
he's clicking the pen. I was like, all right, Vaughn, settle in, ladies. It's coming. Here it comes.
Vaughn, we played the sound a little earlier of a preview of Senator J.D. Vance on Meet the Press today with our colleague Kristen Welker, where he is saying that he essentially agrees with the enemy within comments from Donald Trump, talking about Democrats, specifically like Pelosi and Adam Schiff. And it strikes me as this, why is this their closing argument is really what I'd like to know. And then This is not what we do in America. This is just, I can't remember, you know, I'm 34 years old. I can't remember any other Republican presidential candidates making the case that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have made about the fact that, like, America is trash, it's garbage, maybe I'll be nice after, in a couple months, I want to be a dictator on day one. Like, what is the argument here? Take me into the MAGA world.
I think the difference between the campaigns that you and Michael have run was most campaigns throughout the last decades of American history have been on unite to win campaign strategies. That's not Donald Trump's. It's divide to win, because he believes that there are enough of those MAGA faithful that are energized by the personal attacks, that is what gets them involved and gets them engaged. And at the same time, for J.D. Vance and anybody that is trying to run alongside Donald Trump, there is only one way to run, and it is to run that way. The issue for them is we had this conversation, all of us, right after the 2022 midterms, when the likes of Carrie Lake lost, and Tudor Dixon in Michigan, and Herschel Walker in Georgia, and up in Wisconsin and Nevada, these Trump-backed candidates for Senate and governor, they all tried to run like Donald Trump on election denialism, on conspiracy theories, on personal attacks, on supporting the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And the voters came out, despite what even the polls were suggesting, came out and rejected that form of republicanism. Yet we knew Donald Trump, 2 weeks after those midterm losses, announced his 2024 presidential run. And at Mar-a-Lago, inside of that ballroom, he made clear exactly how he was going to run. He was going to run the exact way that those 2022 Republicans ran and lost. Fast forward, we are here at this moment of time. The question is, has he been able to convince a few more Americans that the conspiracy theories are real or worth dismissing to vote for him and put him back into the White House? Or are Americans again going to reject that form of politics that has long been rejected in the United States of America?
Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden comes days after his own former chief of staff went on record to describe his former boss as a fascist. But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling, because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally, a rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism. Joining me now, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, history professor at New York University and author of Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present. And Anne Applebaum, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, staff writer at The Atlantic, and author of Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. I cannot wait to have this conversation with both of you. And Ruth, thank you both very much for being here. Ruth, since you are not at the table, let me start with you and just talk to us about the parallels that we're seeing between 1939, that rally at Madison Square Garden, and the rally we're seeing right now at Madison Square Garden, and the rhetoric that's already coming out of this rally.
Yeah, of course, this is not a casual choice to have it there. And although Donald Trump objects strenuously to people comparing him to Hitler, he is the one who has gone out of his way to use Nazi rhetoric, talking about polluting our blood, calling people vermin, even releasing a campaign ad that says he's going to create a unified Reich in America. And of course, as General Kelly said, complaining that, you know, generals should be obeying him like Hitler's generals obeyed the Fuhrer. So this is not at all casual. I want to make a comment about what Von Hilliard was talking about. You know, Trump has been using his rallies since 2015 to radicalize people, to incite violence, to kind of loosen people's inhibitions against violence. And all of the racist stereotypes against Latinos and blacks and misogynist stereotypes and all of the vulgarity and the crudeness is designed to help people lose their inhibitions and their taboos against inciting, against committing violence if the leader asks them to.
And, Anne, you write exactly this point in your latest piece in The Atlantic. Why does Trump sound like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini? And you walk us through what Mussolini used to say, what Stalin used to say, what Hitler used to say, and then you bring up things that Donald Trump has said, including they're poisoning the blood of our country, they're destroying the blood of our country, bad genes, they're not humans, they're animals, cold-blooded killers, the enemy from within, sick, radical left lunatics. And you say he knows exactly what he's doing when he does this.
So a couple of points to make about it. One is this isn't language that's been part of mainstream American politics before. When I was writing that article, I went back and looked at a few other eras in the last century to see if I could find anybody talking about vermin or poisoning the blood or comparing political enemies to insects. And I couldn't find it. I mean, even George Wallace's horrific racist speech that he made in 1963, where he's segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, he doesn't use that kind of language. This is language that is deliberately being imported and used knowingly by Trump and by others around him, including at this rally. It's also interesting that normally at this point in a campaign, a candidate would be going to the center. I mean, he would be looking for, swing voters, for, people in the middle, people who are trying to make up their minds. But it looks to me, and this echoes a little bit what Ruth just said, that what Trump is trying to do is radicalize people who don't usually vote to reach some kind of, latent, angry, maybe racist, maybe violent segment of society that doesn't usually turn out for elections. And that would just be my guess as to what he's doing, because this, and particularly this rally, is using a kind of extremism that we're not used to certainly in the last 2 weeks of U.S. presidential campaign.
Ruth, to Anne's point, he's using this rhetoric to get these folks, to get them out to vote. I just wonder, is he also doing this to get them to go the next step? And that is to incite violence, to have them do violence if he doesn't win?
Yeah, I believe so. He does need them to vote, but as we well know from all the GOP senators and congressmen who refuse to commit to accepting the results of a free and fair election, the GOP is now an autocratic party for the most part that is dependent on election denial, the big lie that they still won't refute Trump, idea that he won the 2020 election.
Ruth, let me stop you there for 1 second, because just taking the stage right now is someone who fosters that notion that Donald Trump didn't lose the 2020 election. His vice presidential running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, who is now taking the podium. Not sure we're going to take this, but Ruth, finish your response.
Yeah, and now I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, Ruth.
That's okay.
Get your train of thought back, and I'm gonna come to Anne. Anne, if you want to pick up on what Ruth was talking about. In fact, let me read something you wrote also in this Atlantic piece that actually mentions Ruth. There was a rally that Trump did where he stood in front of a huge slogan, "Trump was right about everything." And you write, this is language borrowed directly from Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist. Soon after the rally, the scholar Ruth Ben-Ghiat posted a photograph of a building in Mussolini's Italy displaying his slogan, "Mussolini is always right."
So this indicates to me that people around Trump are deliberately echoing this language, that this is part of their game. that for whatever reasons, whether it's to get out the vote or whether it's to prepare people to commit acts of violence after they lose the election, I don't know. But they do know what they're doing. They're not making accidental allusions to the 1930s. You don't do that by accident or by mistake.
Right. And Ruth, I'm just wondering, to Ann's point, I mean, we've never seen this before in American politics. We've never heard this language from the top levels of American politics. I'm just wondering, can we as a nation pull back from the brink that we're hanging off of?
We can certainly hope so, that this exacerbation of extremism will wake people up, those who still think it can't happen here, and get them to see the GOP and Donald Trump as in an authoritarian frame, whatever that means to them, because this is a party that has exited democracy. It no longer believes in the norms and practices and values of democracy, which is why January 6th happened and why the GOP passed a resolution in 2022 that said that January 6th was, quote, legitimate political discourse. Mm-hmm. They now think that violence is a legitimate way to solve political problems. And that's what Trump has been doing at his rallies, trying to get people to see violence and racism and misogyny as legitimate political discourse. So I'm hoping that this overt Nazi parallels that they are cultivating and this extremism will wake people up and get them to see that it's not just going to be immigrants. It's going to be a very wide range of targets, as you see from the other speeches. They targeted many, many Americans. And I'm hoping people will see the danger.